some of the parents that come in there and they're just so defeated. They're so beat down and they're just so tired, and they've been on this waiting list and they've been on that waiting list. You know, and it can get discouraging.
Your husband's wanting to know where dinner is. Your kids pulling on you, mommy, mommy, mommy. The dog's barking. Okay, just give me 10 minutes. I'm not doing all this work for this amount of change. That's the for real.
Sometimes you don't get your change. We don't get paid. You don't come, we don't get paid. Let us know in advance so some of these kids on that waiting list.
Kick the teacher. He kicked the teacher. He kicked the teacher. Well, what happened before?
I need more parents to be honest about their children. Be honest about your child. Your child do things that they shouldn't do.
Parents need to be a little bit more objective.
Yes.
Well, welcome back to another episode of It's Giving Care. I'm Marissa, your host, and I am excited for an awesome conversation today. With me, I have two of the Atlanta area's finest when it comes to occupational therapy. Our two daughters go to their therapy center, Douglasville Children's Therapy, and so I am very grateful that Miss Dana and Miss MaRetta came out tonight so we could have a conversation about therapy and the family connection and all these different things. So with that, I will let each of you introduce yourselves and tell us about what drew you to becoming an occupational therapist.
You want to go first?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. Well, I graduated in 1983. So I've been in OT now for 40 years.
And she doesn't look like it, by the way.
Yeah, checks in the mail. Checks in the mail, Marissa. Checks in the mail. And I'll have to be honest. My first initiative was to be a physical therapist.
Okay.
Everybody, I love moving. I love muscles. I love working out. But I got a work-study job in the OT department, the academic OT department. And they kept saying, you need to think about OT. And I'm like, no, I don't. You guys don't do anything.
Right.
So they let me start sitting in on some of the classes. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you guys do that? And you do that? And at the time, they actually had brought in a lot of sensory equipment. So the students were on the equipment.
Okay.
That sold me. So I applied the next year.
I love it.
I applied the next year. Always loved peds. Didn't start off in peds, but I came full circle.
Wow, that's awesome. What about you, Miss MaRetta?
Very similar. I was an athlete in college, and so automatically after I graduated, I was a psych major, so I had an interest in psychology.
Okay.
But then I thought I wanted to be a physical therapist because I was an athlete, so I went and I shadowed a physical therapist, and while I was shadowing the physical therapist, I couldn't take my eye off the occupational therapist and just some of the things that they were doing as it pertained to function.
Okay.
And so it drew my attention. So when I went home later that day, I started to research it. I've always known to some degree I wanted to work with either babies or peds, but I looked into OT and I looked at, the connection between mental health, peds, which all of these things can be also done in physical therapy, but it was something about just that family involvement and that peds that's dealing with their understanding and their function and independence that drew me. Mm-hmm. And so I graduated in 93 from undergrad, 97 for OT. So I always get my years mixed up. And so I've been doing this for about 28 years.
Okay.
And
wow.
I also dabbled in different settings before I've done NICU, I've done hips, I've done spinal cord. So I was around, and then I ended up back with peds. I lived in New York for a while, so I did peds a little bit there while I was also doing hands and shoulders. I did peds in the evening, and then when I moved to Georgia, most of the opportunities were in peds. When I initially got here, and so I went straight to peds because I already had an interest in it.
I think what would be great, because I think about people like me that if I think back 3.5, 4 years ago, before Brielle was born, I didn't have a whole lot of knowledge base of what occupational therapy is. And then, I think some people, if you were to quiz them, they might think it's related to like, employment or something like
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
And so now I've had good exposure to it with my daughters, and then also my father, when he was in the nursing home recently, he had occupational therapy, and I saw some of the differences working with a senior, and kind of this thing that he was doing versus what we do with the girls. So just maybe give some high level, understanding for people of occupational therapy and maybe how that differs and maybe some of the similarities as well or overlap that you might see with physical therapy.
Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind for occupational therapy is function. And depending on what stage of life you're in, what you're doing, that can mean different things.
Okay.
Okay, so there is overlap. There's the new term, self-management. Everything from feeding yourself, bathing yourself, dressing yourself, and that starts with the little bitties, right? Taking off the socks, taking off the shoes, and that translates over to geriatrics. You have a hip, you have arthritis.
Right.
How are you going to get those things done? So, as far as overlap, I think for me, when I look at everything, everything has to come together. All right. There needs to be carryover. If physical therapy is working on ambulation, they've got to get from a place to do something.
Right.
So what we like to do is make sure we're speaking with physical therapy to say, hey, what are you guys working on?
Okay.
So that we can carry over whatever skills that they need to, whatever skills that they're working on in physical therapy. Because everything is full circle. Nothing stands independent. Nothing really does. And so that's one of the things that we try and stress with our families. You can do a lot of different things simultaneously. So same thing. I mean, we have physical therapy. We can't leave out speech and language pathology as well, right? When you go somewhere, you need to tell somebody something, whether it's just pointing or communication. Communication is big, whether it's pointing, whether it's signing, whether it's a device. But we work. Everything works in tandem. Nothing is separate.
Just to piggyback a little bit on what Dana is saying, I think a part of it is just like there is overlap. But when I think about transfers, we do transfers. When I think about, we PT and OT may both be working on core strengthening, but for different reasons. They may be working on core strengthening for them just to be able to sit upright, whereas we're working on core strengthening for them to sit upright, but also to be able to put their socks on and to maintain that, to maintain sitting upright while they're putting their legs through their pants. So it's like we shift our thought process when we're looking at it. So it's our foundational strengthening for the purpose of function, which is you donning your socks, doffing your socks, pulling your shirt over your head, shampooing your hair. So that's where you may see the overlap. And the same thing goes with language, So sometimes a lot of the kids who have language disorders may use an ACC device, but in order to use it, they have to be able to point.
Right.
So we may be working on an ACC device, just like speech is, but for different purposes. We're working on that point.
Gotcha.
That visual attention to the device. And so you see overlap, but we have different focuses when we are actually working on the activity.
Okay.
And so that's how I see it sometimes.
Got it. So when I think about a family that maybe is in our situation where we start therapy in the NICU and we are going through different stages of growth and development, we're at the point now with Brielle where, she's 3.5 and she's walking and progressing and doing all these things. I'm curious, and I think the audience would be as well, of what does it look like for someone to start OT and maybe some of these other therapies when they're young? And then how does it continue and evolve as the child grows? Like, just at a high level, I know that's probably a loaded question, but like, how does someone envision the way that they continue to work with you all as their child grows?
Well, I started in the NICU. It was one of my first experiences with peds. And so I can definitely say that what I was doing in the NICU was a little different than when I was in the home working on peds. Because at that point, I'm dealing with a really fragile child who may have been overwhelmed from the lights, lack of touch, a lot of body-to-body touch with their parent. They may be tied down because of the fact that they're in the NICU. They got all these cords, these beeps. So I'm working on, and if it's a feeding, my feeding may look different than my kids I see in the clinic. So I see it as stages. And so when I was in the NICU, my focus was on trying to get the child in a state of calm.
Okay.
The best way I could, using the environment, talking to the nurses on about touching and stimulating, and then feeding. My feeding looked a little different because I'm dealing with a really, really small mouth.
Right.
And so it's not the same as being able to talk to the child and talk them through it. Now, I did communicate, in a different voice, different tone. But as I transitioned from the NICU and started doing peds, I shifted my thought process.
Right.
Because depending on where that child is at. So now they are discharged from the NICU and they have a different set of needs.
Right.
So their feeding might have been addressed in the NICU. So now I might be dealing with them using a spoon. So as the child changes and as they develop new skills and new function, we shift our focus. And so that's how we see it as they grow. Now that they're feeding or they're using a spoon, but now they need to know how to use a pencil. They need to know how to write.
Right.
So it's just like we continually change based off the child's needs.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think for me too, the long-term goal is discharge.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to talk about that next. So.
Yeah, it's, you have to have a starting point. So that's why we evaluate and we talk to parents about their goals. A therapist can come up with goals, all right? We do. But it's also important to include you guys in the goal setting process because, again, we know what we want, but you have your home, you have your routines. And so, yes, there are skills that kids have to develop as part of the developmental process. However, your goal may be for your kid to sit up in bed. I don't know. And who am I to say no?
Right.
But maybe before we sit up in bed, we've got to get head control.
Right.
Exactly. So, but it's important to know where the parents are so that we can piggyback on that and we can work together to make those things happen. But I agree with everything MaRetta said there. They're stages. They're stages. Just like, say, when you start, if you haven't been to the gym in years, you go into the gym, you can't start lifting 100 pounds. Right. You can't get on a treadmill for 5 hours. Right. Similarly, with kiddos, we have goals depending on where they are, and we see where they are, and that's where we meet them, and then we try and go to the next level.
Okay.
And I do think, adding on what Dana is saying, we do think about the caregiver.
Yes.
Because,
absolutely,
if we're doing something in the clinic that can't be carried over in the home, how functional and productive is it really going to be? So we also have to take that into consideration when we are coming up with goals or with the parent, and when we are asking the parent to do certain things at home. Are they capable? Are they able? Are they stressed out over there? Are they overwhelmed? Is this possible? How can we integrate what we're asking them to do in their day as opposed to it being a set amount of time that they're pulling themselves away from being a house, a wife or a husband or the maid or the cook or the chauffeur to make sure that we're implementing that into that day. So that's another piece, another component that we have to think about when we are engaging the child and the parent in a session. So what is it going to look like afterwards? We always say our 1 hour a week doesn't make half the difference as the 6 days a week that the parent is integrating different things within their daily life that affects their child.
Gotcha. I feel like we've had that conversation a lot.
Yes, we have.
And for those of you out there, I don't know if you can relate where, I don't know, it's like a sense of I'm not doing enough, or I could be doing better. I'm not doing enough. I can't check the box consistently that my child is getting, especially in our case for the feeding. I'm like, those G tubes, we rely on them, good or bad. They're keeping them nourished and all that. But, we've had our struggles. And so, yeah, I'd like to talk about that too, right? We think about parents, and there's probably a spectrum of parents that are in their level of engagement. I know some parents that are like on a 10 and they're researching and they have really detailed schedules of keeping up with the kids' therapy, and they're reinforcing it and they're bringing you all ideas. me and Kevin are probably somewhere in the middle, you know, where we're doing things and maybe not doing other things consistently. And then I'm sure you have other families that are just way out that don't even bring the kid to therapy, let alone do anything at home. So like,
Absolutely.
I don't know, let's talk about the families and where we all fit on the spectrum and how we can continue to move forward for our kids.
I think as therapists, we sort of develop our own kind of little paradigms.
Okay.
There are some therapists out there that are, when you leave, you're going to have a piece of paper in your hand.
Right.
I started off like that, but I soon discovered that most parents have so much to do that if they have to go get a piece of paper to follow through on something you ask them to do, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to happen.
Okay.
And then when they come back and you say, so how is so-and-so going? Then that's where the guilt comes into play.
Right.
That's not the purpose. So what I try and do, MaRetta speak, you know, her approach. We try and go over things in the session.
Okay.
In the moment. I'll give you a piece of paper after the fact, but that's after you come back and show me that you have shown me and you've done what I've asked you to do.
Right.
And then we try and do it, like incorporate it into something like MaRetta mentioned earlier that you're already doing, all right? Because that's one less thing that you have to think about.
Right.
If you have to get a piece of paper out to do these right? You got this happening, you got a kitty over here, you got the phone ringing, you got dinner. That's just for real. So I'd rather give you one thing, maybe 2, that you'll do over the next week. And you can be, even if you don't get it done 7 days, if you got it done 5, right? As opposed to getting it done one time and then you don't know where the paper is. Right? So there's ink time, paper, and then on top of that, parents feeling guilty because they didn't do their part.
Right.
So that's one strategy. And the other strategy is we need parents to understand you have to help us help you. We cannot do it by ourselves. Even if your kid comes to see us every day, once a week, 2 hours a day, yes, they'll make progress, but they're with you for 22 of the other 4 hours. So you have to help us help you. If you don't understand something, ask your therapist. And yes, I'm one of them. Hold our feet to the fire.
Right.
And I agree. Now, my parents I base what I give my parents on what I think that they can do and what they're capable of. Some parents like paper. Some parents are that I need it. I need the paper.
Right.
I do like to, as Dana said also, I do like to go over it with the child and the parent, with them showing me them doing it on their child.
Right.
Me being a therapist who had a child with special needs also, I learned pretty quickly how to, I had to, because I had another child, to implement what I needed to do for him in my day. And so when I'm talking to parents, a lot of times I ask them, talk to me about what your day looks like. So, hey, well, while you're doing this, for 5 minutes, just sit them in a high chair. And let's just do a puzzle. I try to narrow the amount of time.
Okay.
So, because 15 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day is better than 0.
Yep.
Right.
Especially if it's consistent.
Yep.
I try to encourage parents to be realistic about how much time you can give. I remember giving my son 60 minutes every night.
Right.
Every night while my other child sat and watched me. So what was she not getting that 60 minutes?
Right.
And so I know the guilt. I know I got to fix, because you become obsessed with fixing, right?
Right.
And so I had to move from fixing to accepting and learning how to move him from where I want to be to where he's showing me he wants to be.
Right.
And that was a shift. That was a mind shift, because I'm coming from as a therapist and a parent. So as a therapist, the parents make us feel
you
like
have a different set of tools than the average
and the
parent.
parents think we're going to fix their child. So I already got the, fix mode because I'm a therapist in my head, and then a fix mode because I'm a parent.
Right.
And so I had to do a lot of shifting. And so what I noticed with some parents is when you have that discussion with them, that open-ended discussion, and get an opportunity to know that you're going to make mistakes. Parenting is something that I make mistakes every probably 15 minutes, probably, if I look at it.
Right.
And just to rethink and to de-guilt myself, because that's it. When you start to de-guilt yourself, you just start to spiral, and then you don't want to do anything at that point. So just trying to help the parents say, let's be realistic. If 10 minutes is all you can give me, let's talk about what that 10 minutes look like.
Okay.
How can we make that 10 minutes something that's functional for this child? Not that you have have to separate yourself. And so I made that mistake. So I know now differently when I'm talking to the parents to say, hey, let's just think about this. 5 minutes is all you can give me. So 5 minutes, let's read.
Right.
When you read, let's point to that apple and let's say red and let's say, what the R sounds like, and if that's all you can do for that 5 minutes, thank you. You've done that for 5 minutes and you're okay. So, and then there are different parents, exactly like you said. I've learned that their parents have different situations.
Right.
So I learned not to compare myself to other parents because some of these parents who have the opportunity and the time to do a lot of stuff are able to do that.
Right.
And then there are parents who still have other obligations that are not.
Right.
So they're able to do what they can do. So I learned to de-guilt again because in my world, I run into a lot of parents with a lot of different abilities.
Right.
A lot of parents have some struggles. It could be emotional. It could be financial. It could be mental. There's so many things that parents come with sometimes. Not to mention you have this additional child that you're trying to make sure you meet their needs. And so if I could share anything with parents, I would be like, accept yourself for who you are. That's number one. Number two, accept your child for who they are. That's number two. And number three, meet each other at a happy median, so that you're not always feeling like you're falling short, because you will always feel like you're falling short if you don't find that level of acceptance for you and your child. And so I think that was a big piece for me that I had to find for myself, and I try to give that to the parents now because I'm like, hey, I'm trying to save you from what I went through years ago. And so let's look at all these strengths. Let's look at all these great things that they're doing instead of looking at all of these things that they're not doing.
Half full glass.
Yeah.
Half full glass. If I could piggyback it a little bit too on what MaRetta was talking, especially when there are other kiddos involved, going to that piece where the kiddos, sometimes the other kiddos, you can pull them in.
Yeah.
And they get excited about it. They have great ideas. They see our little sister Brielle doing blah, 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 and let's do ABC and 1, 2, 3. So you're actually getting the follow through, the carryover at home, and the other kids are involved and included. So it doesn't make them feel like they're not special.
Yeah.
So that's another strategy that we try and include. There have been times when we've had, because they think therapy is fun, the older kids, they think it's fun. All right, so I tell you what, do some good listening with mommy, and the last 10 minutes you come back and you play.
Right.
Wonderful. Then they also get to see how to play. Right. Especially with the kiddos that have a few more challenges. And a lot of times you'll see them following through when you're in the kitchen doing something.
Absolutely.
Right.
So we pull as much as we can from as many sources as we can. And in the end, the total benefits, the whole benefits.
I have a couple questions. So when we think about parents, for those that you see are maybe ahead of the curve and are more successful, like, are there some tips that you see, even like down to maybe they're not taking extensive notes, but I know that sometimes you might tell us, Miss Dana, do this. And we're like, yeah. And then we get in the car and get everybody in. And then it's like, wait, what did Miss Dana ask us to do? Or maybe you tell Kevin it doesn't come back to me, or vice versa. So like, what are some like very basic, practical tips that parents can use that may result in better outcomes on like their follow through?
Well, one of the first things that I think is really important is try not to have your therapist tell you what to do.
Okay.
Have them show you what to do.
Okay.
How many times can you relate in your life when somebody told you to do something and then you're like, but then when you actually did it.
Right.
And that's sensory based. You get it in your system, you felt it. Right. You okay? So if there's a motor component to that, there's a sensory component to that, there's a cognitive component to that.
Right.
So you're ingraining that every time you repeat it. You've done it. As opposed to, okay, here's your exercise. So that's the first thing. I would suggest that parents, you ask your therapist to show you, like not just show you, but have you do it in their presence.
Okay.
And then they can say, hey, try holding so-and-so here, or try putting your finger there, or maybe ease up your pressure, or they can give you feedback in the moment. That's one of the first things that I would suggest. And the second thing I think is definitely consistency with what you do, whatever it is that you do. Not that you can get it all done, but be consistent. Consistency makes the biggest difference. That's what I see.
And teamwork, definitely.
Absolutely.
I see that a lot. I talk to parents a lot about consistency. The child is going to choose the path of least resistance. So if mom is doing it one
And
way,
so do the parents.
and dad is doing it another way, the child is going to go for the way that's more pleasing to them.
Right.
Right. And so is it the most effective way? Maybe not. And so I always try to get the parents to find a happy median. That's my biggest thing. You guys need to find a happy median and be consistent with it. So if dad's better at something, then you guys do it dad's way.
Right.
If mom is better at something, then you do it mom's way. But just be consistent. I piggyback on that with Dana. And, and it, can take a toll on a marriage. It can take a toll on a relationship, especially if one person is the primary caregiver, right?
Yeah.
And so I see more improvements with kids when both parents are engaged and both parents are involved, and they have that discussion about, okay, you're better at this and I'm better at that. So let's piggyback, and you do this, and if we're going to discipline, we're both going to discipline this way because it works and it's consistent. And so I definitely see more improvements when I see that it doesn't have anything to do with individual characteristics at that point. It's just how the parents, and let's say if it's a single parent and it's not a relationship, it's not a husband-wife situation or a boyfriend-girlfriend situation. However, if there's someone else helping you with that child, regardless of who they are, it still needs to be some teamwork and some consistency, and some shared responsibilities, because somebody is going to get burnt out. Right. And so when you have that, that helps. And now for the parents who don't have any support at all, I say the best thing is to find some support.
Yeah.
Some support somehow, some way. Reach out to organizations, Mother's Morning Out programs, or sometimes these churches have different respite nights, or find some type of support, and know your limits and know your strengths, and be transparent with the therapist.
Right.
I love when parents say to me, Ms. MaRetta, I'm not doing that.
Yep.
Right.
I love it. I don't get upset. Then you just go back and say, I'm not doing that.
Right.
I'm
and
not
then
doing
you
that.
didn't know, and there's a different expectation.
And we know. We know.
Right.
Yeah, we always know.
We know. We know when the parents...
Like we come in and there's a sign on our shirt that says, they're like a C+,
Well, we know what we're looking for, We know what we should expect to see. And so, but with that also, we're not saying, you didn't do your homework.
Right.
But we are saying, I can say Dana and I both, we say, we get it. But let's at least try.
Right.
Let's try to. And so if that's not working for you, then let's talk about that. Let's figure out why it's not working.
Yep.
And that's that clinical reasoning that we use every day with our kids. So we turn it into the parent situation. Let's figure this out together. Because I'd rather the parent feel successful. Success and the way it looks is different for everyone.
Right.
Right? And so it may be, oh my God, they looked at me. That's success. If that's what makes you happy, I'm gonna high five you. We high fiving together.
Right.
We're hallelujah. We praise. We're doing it all because that's your success.
Right.
So it's really hard to say to any one parent that this tip is going to work, because we have to just look at every parent in isolation. And give them. But the things that we say: consistency, teamwork, and being transparent. I think that's just really drives any therapist. And I don't think there's too many therapists out there that wouldn't prefer for a parent to say, this is just hard for me. I can't. Could you please help me figure out a way to help my child without you telling me I have to sit out 60 minutes because it's impossible.
Right. Gotcha.
Because if nothing else, they have to respect you.
Right.
And that's a big thing. It is. You have to have that mutual respect for one another to be able to say that. You want to be comfortable, you want to be comfortable with your therapist to be able to say that. Right. So.
And that's why some people sometimes go through different therapists to find the right fit, So yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Before we shift, I did want to ask one more question on expanding the kind of the support system. When people have home nursing and the nurses come to therapy, what's that experience? Like, do you find, it's been a mixed bag for us, right? If some nurses are like, yeah, what do I need to do? I want to learn. And some are like, that's not a nurse's job. I just do the medication and all this other stuff. So like, what's been your experience? And I don't know if you found that you've had to kind of nudge some nurses along to really get more engaged.
Feeding more so, right?
Yes, feeding more
Yeah.
so. Yes and yes. And
Okay.
I get it because there's some agencies that don't want to be liable, maybe especially talking about a kiddo who has the risk of aspirating.
Right.
And I understand that. However, if a nurse is feeding a child, then we're going to train the nurse like we train the parents.
Right.
We're going to show exercises. We're going to have you actually do the feeding so we can say, okay, do this first or
Right.
watch this. And observation, it's not always about feeding. Look at her face. What is her face telling you?
Right.
Okay. Or his face. What do you see going around the lips? Do you see, was doing great in the beginning, but now things are kind of starting to go south. So
Right.
what's happening? So as far as that's concerned, if the nurse has the ability and it's not against the regulations of the company, we want to train whatever staff is
Right.
engaging with the child, whether
Okay.
it's how to calm the child, how to engage the child, whatever that falls under the realm of occupational therapy, we want to train.
Okay.
But I am going to add this because nurses do tend to talk to therapists, and sometimes they just feel like that they don't have the autonomy or the
Right.
power to do certain things with the kids. They feel like that they don't know if the parents are going to be okay with that. And
Okay.
there are some nurses that I know this in there. They're looking, they're asking questions. We love those nurses.
Right.
And then there's those nurses that hand a child over to you, and you don't see them to the end of the session.
Right. They're in the front.
They're in the front of it.
You don't see them to the end of the
They're in the lobby.
session.
They're waiting.
And then you have those nurses that'll be like, hey, could you talk to mom about this?
Right.
The nurses that feel like that they've tried to educate the parents on things and the parents weren't always receptive.
Okay.
And so, and explaining to the nurses sometimes that they're listening from a different set of ears when you're talking to a parent. They want their child alive.
Right.
And so they're in survival mode, where so they don't always hear it. Well, and they say, well, they respect you more than they feel like that the parents respect their therapists more than they respect the nurses sometimes. And so just I would share, if you got a good nurse, let her know that you appreciate her. If you have a good nurse, have that conversation with them about what that they do have a certain level of autonomy if you want them to have it. So that it's not a guessing game. And I always feel like if you got a nurse that loves your child, you have a prize. Because the nurses that love their kids and they come back to the clinic, I'm like, man, you want to come to my house and be the nanny?
Right.
Because they're all in. 10 toes,
Right.
10 feet, 10 fingers, they're all in. And
Right.
they love that baby. They love that child. And you should have that comfort that you can leave your child with that nurse and it's okay. So I would say communication between the parents and the nurse, I think, is huge. Parents, be brave enough to set your parameters and your standards, what you expect for your child.
Yeah.
But also give the nurses the opportunities to have an opinion,
Right.
and to let them know that you respect their opinion. But that doesn't mean that you're always going to shift how your household is run just because they have an opinion of how they think things should be.
Right.
And I think it's helpful too, probably when that conversation happens in the beginning.
Yes.
That way, everyone knows where everyone stands.
Right.
There's no guessing. Everybody knows what the playing field is. So yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. All right, so I want to shift gears a little bit. We think about both of you having been in your field for quite some time. You've seen a lot of change. I'm sure technology has had a part of it. So I'm just curious of how has occupational therapy evolved and kind of where are we now from like the impact. I don't know if there's broader expectations for how children are supposed to, perform as they're going through therapy. So I think from your perspective, that's not something that families necessarily have a vantage point of understanding what is going on from your perspective. You know what I mean?
So I want to make sure I understand the question. So
Maybe
what
it's
I'm
two
hearing-
questions. So it's like, how has it evolved, your industry? I don't know if you've seen a lot of change over time and the way that you do what you do.
Okay.
And then where we are presently, like, are there certain things that maybe would be helpful for families to know about what it means to be doing your job and delivering the care that you do? So maybe I cleaned it up a little
All right.
bit.
Okay. As far as the evolution of the profession, when I graduated, there was a lot more, there was a bigger, different variety of jobs.
Okay.
Primarily nursing home, rehab, acute care, home health. Since that time, because of technology, therapists are actually creating jobs.
Okay.
In different arenas where I'll be like, no OT doing that. So I'll be honest, right now the field is wide open and it's just limitless because, like I said, OTs are becoming extremely creative. I think I mentioned to you earlier that now a lot of traditional OTs, are jumping ship just because of the insurance issues and just all the stuff, I'll use stuff,
Right.
loosely, that goes along with it. And so they're just tired. And so over the years, people, the new grads are like, I'm not doing that. This is my observation. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. You pay me, I go home, I'm good.
And you see that because you have students, so you're seeing that sometimes personally too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our population, I mean, we work with some heavy hitters. There's some facilities that won't see our kiddos, right? We have a lot of autistics, we have a lot of sensory processing kiddos, and a lot of facilities, because a lot of it is seen as behavior, we see it as behavior for a reason. Now, no one likes to be hit, kicked, or bitten.
Right.
However, when we get our kids modulated, you see our kids are kids.
Right.
Right? Our kids are kids. So a new grad coming in seeing that's like, I'm not in for that kind of a party. Let me
Right.
go over here where I can work for my hours and I go home and get paid and I'm finished.
Got
It
it.
takes work.
It's work.
It takes work, and to piggyback off what Dana's saying, there's a rise in the number of children with sensory processing issues and neurodiverse kids,
Yep.
and kids with ADHD,
Yep.
and so the numbers have skyrocketed, and so I would have to say about 70 to 80% of our caseload has those similar diagnoses. We don't really care about the diagnoses. We're treating symptoms. We're treating what we see.
Right.
But with that being said, it takes a lot more clinical reasoning. And when I say that, I mean the why behind what you see.
Right.
And so it's, I sometimes tell my husband, I'd rather do physical work sometimes because the thinking, the constant thinking, I love it. But you go home
It can be
mentally and
draining.
drained.
Yeah.
You go home drained. And so I think that we've seen a rise in that. And I agree with Dana as in too, there's so many things now. I see OTs in hospital administration. I see OTs helping people with disability travel. They're traveling
Yep.
with people with disabilities to set up everything for them when they get to their destination. I do school OT. That's always been around, but you're seeing more OTs that are now in administration at schools. So it's really taking. OT is taking itself into other areas because we are required to learn about so many areas,
Yeah.
right? When we're studying. So I do see it expanding. I do see this younger generation, they work smarter. They work
Right.
smarter, not as hard, but smart.
Right.
And they create pathways. They
Yep.
create opportunities for themselves. They will say, hey, my foundational educational background makes me equipped to be here and to do this and to shape this job and a role for me that's going to help benefit your company or
Right.
to benefit your position or whatever.
Okay.
And so I do see it evolving. I see it growing. I see it changing, not in a bad way. I just think that we've had to, as a profession, shift our focus based off what's going on in the here and now,
Right.
but yet still staying focused on the foundational piece of occupation and function and performance.
I think, and with that being said, though, because there's such a rise in the autistics and the sensory processing, what happens to our kiddos?
Right.
There's ABA. Some of our kiddos need more than ABA. A lot of our kiddos need more than ABA.
Right.
And so, with that being said, there's a shortage of therapists to work in pediatrics, specifically with our population of kiddos. So we do, which makes parent education that much more important.
Absolutely. I didn't even realize about some of the, I think of myself as a parent that just knew nothing about the world that we're in now. And it's just been an unfolding as we've evolved with my daughters. But when we started with you, Miss Dana, you're talking about sensory stuff. I'm like, yeah, I don't know what that means in the context of why Brielle is shutting down and falling asleep and throwing up in therapy. And we're in the dark while she's like getting her OT therapy.
Yeah.
And so, it's definitely a lot to learn. And I feel like, in particularly when it comes to like the sensory aspects, there's more, I think, for parents to really unpack as it relates to their child. And it seems like, from what I've observed, like there's a diagnosis aspect, and then it becomes like the application of like what you see, what presents with your child.
Correct.
And
Without a doubt, yes.
I would love to hear what you guys think, just at a high level, about like sensory challenges in particular, and how different families navigate that, and what you might see with children there.
One of the first things we see is parents navigating their lives around their kids.
Right.
Because when they do A, B, or C, D happens. So we just don't do A, B, or C.
Yep.
If we go out to eat, we sit down, and baby girl's going to start crying. We're not going to even, the waitress isn't going to even have a chance to come to get our order.
Yep.
So we try and calm her down, and then we end up leaving. Or we go grocery shopping, and baby boy is pulling everything off the shelf.
Yep.
All right. So now we order. All right, and we pick up curbside.
And we're guilty of that, navigating around. Like, what are they going to be able to handle? If they can't handle it, we got to find an alternate approach,
But that's survival.
Right.
That's normal. We all do it.
Right.
We all do it. A lot of times our kids get the rap of misbehaving. Because what we hear is, they're fine once we get home.
Right.
Girl, once they see we're driving up in the driveway, they are absolutely fine.
Right.
Of course they're fine.
Right.
They're home.
Right.
Home is predictable. They know where everything is.
Right.
We don't know. It could have been the environment. It could have been the colors. It could have been the movement. It could have been the smell. It could have been any or combination of things as to why they didn't want to go into that store. And so they're going to do what they can do to keep from going into that store.
Right.
They cut up one time, cut up two times, and guess what? We leave. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to cut up.
Right.
Right? It's not even that complex. It's cause and effect.
Right. And they're smart to know how to maybe manipulate some of those situations to get what they want, or what they don't want.
It's learned behavior.
Learned behavior.
That's all it is.
No parent wants to hear their child cry or be upset. So you're taught early, if I just don't do this, then they're quiet.
Right.
If I give them this, they'll stop crying.
Right.
So it's not like you're trying to spoil the child. It's that no parent wants their child to be upset, especially if the child is not verbal and they can't tell you what's going on with them.
Right.
I always tell parents, we laugh and jokingly say apples and trees a lot of times, because sometimes the parents come in and they're like, I don't understand, why he can't tolerate those tags. And this is a parent that I've seen wear the same cotton shirt every week. And so I'm like, oh, really? Okay. But, and then sensory has such a broad meaning.
Yeah.
I feel like everybody has something sensory going on. Like somebody said, I love the smell of gas. That's feeding into your olfactory system.
Right.
No one's sitting around saying, I want to sniff gas.
Right.
So that means it's sending a signal to your brain of some sort that this makes me feel good. This makes me feel a certain way.
Okay.
Me, for the longest time, I didn't take my foot and tap on the bed. I couldn't settle down. It can be 90 degrees. I still have to have a blanket on. Right. Because I need that weight on myself, right?
Yeah, I can relate to that.
And so nail biters, smokers, people who have to always have something in their mouth. That's all a sensory-based activity or a sensory-based tool that you're using to organize yourself or to keep yourself focused. And so it's just that our babies who have maladaptive responses to those and don't know to talk themselves off the ledge, doesn't know that when it sounds like that fly is in your eardrum, that you don't start beating your head
Right.
because everybody thinks you're having a meltdown.
Right.
Whereas that fly that's across the room is sitting
Right.
on your eardrum. They're responding to that. And so I think helping parents understand sensory, which is what we try to do.
Yep.
I think it helps them understand a little bit. A lot of times parents say, oh my God, they got that from me.
Right.
I understand exactly what
Yep.
you're talking about. I
Yep.
can't
Right.
stand that. So think about that, and then think about the fact that you can say to yourself, that's just something going on.
Right.
Overlook it and move on. A 1 or 2 year old does not have that ability. So they're going to go into whatever they have to do to avoid it, to get away from it,
Right.
or to get you away from them so that it's not happening anymore.
Right.
So I like to sometimes change it from behavior to response. It's a
That's what it
response to
is.
something.
A
Yep.
response
And so,
to
but we
something.
It
freely
is.
use, well, it's a behavior, but it's really a response.
That's what it is.
Right.
So when you look at it as a response, then you say, then what caused them to respond that way?
Right.
As opposed to, this is just a behavior. And so I try to shift my thinking, or I look at the child and say, what happened in just that moment
Yep.
that none of us picked up on because
Yep.
it's not something that we're sensitive to
Right.
that could have happened. And because I have my own auditory issues, oftentimes I do hear when the AC vent comes on, you know, whereas you may habituated to it and you don't hear it. I
Right.
hear it.
Right.
And I have to say it's just a vent. Whereas
Right.
them, the vent is sitting, the motor's sitting right here,
Right.
you know, and so they want to get out the situation. So I think it's learning a little bit more and having a different level of understanding of sensory and spending more time, you know, looking at yourself too and saying, okay, well, why do I do this?
Right.
How does it make me feel when I do this? You know, and how easy is it for me to stop it? To
Right.
stop doing it when I like it?
Because when we use sensory, that happens at a lower level. So we're going to do a little education here, parents.
All right. I'm
Whoever's
with it.
listening, all this happens at a brain stem level.
Okay.
All right. Now, if something is going on with you, like, oh my goodness, this tag is in the back of my shirt here, and then you go to a cognitive, higher level functioning thing as to what
Okay.
do I need to do? Pull the tag out.
Right.
Rub my neck. Okay.
Right.
But all this stuff happens at a brain stem level, automatic.
Okay.
Okay. And so that maladaptive response that MaRetta's talking about, your brain takes in this information, it gives it meaning. If for any reason that information is all cross-wired, the response you're going to get is going to be maladaptive.
Okay.
Okay. I don't like fire engines. I'm as old as I am, and I will still put my hands up to my ears when I hear
Right.
it because it feels like a knife is going through my ear. If I'm talking to a parent outside, I'll say, okay, give me a second here.
Right.
I'll wait till that passes. I cover my ear, and then
Right.
I'll keep going.
Right.
So I agree with MaRetta, we all have sensory concerns, but with our kiddos, it interferes
Right.
with function, right?
Okay.
We have those responses that we do what we need to do to get through it, but it actually interferes with their function. And that's when it becomes a problem.
Got it. That's actually very practical for parents to think about, because I think especially in a case of maybe you have a premature child like we did, or you're learning as your child is growing what some of their challenges or difficulties might be, to think about it from that standpoint and then allow that to be kind of a foundation for the way you, because I feel like I've learned this, you know, having older children too. I'm like learning my children as they go and as they grow and as they're exposed to new things. And I imagine it's the same way where you're dealing with maybe children with some special challenges or special needs, that you're going to keep learning them as they're exposed to new things. And so thinking about that from a response perspective is actually very helpful. So I appreciate that nugget. So I just have a couple more questions, and this has been such a great conversation. I think most people aren't, you know, I don't know, privileged to be able to just think about like taking a step back from the day-to-day, especially for families that are going to therapy week in and week out. It can become routine. It's like, oh man, it's Monday, it's therapy day, get going.
You got it.
Good morning on Monday morning as I'm trying to wake Kevin up. You got to get up, it's therapy day. So taking a step back to just kind of be a little bit more, you know, reflective of that is actually great. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for having us.
Definitely. When I wanted to make sure I asked this. So when we were in the position of having to move the girls from the hospital setting we transitioned out of the NICU, for Melody, I don't know, we were in one of those cardiac units. There's a bunch of units she was in before coming home. But we went from the in-hospital setting to like outpatient hospital therapy. Then we graduated from that and they're like, okay, it's time to go community-based now. And then it became difficult because it's like, all right, well, where are we supposed to go? And I don't know for some of the people in other parts of the country. Here in Atlanta, it's definitely very regionalized of where you can have better access to therapists and resources. Our challenge was most places were either, like a wait list. We were on a wait list with y'all for a while, and then we finally got, I was like, yes, we made it. So how are you finding families navigate when they're trying to get the care that they need for their children? They're committed to it, but the access is just a challenge. Like, how are you seeing people navigate that?
They're not. They're not. Which takes us right back to parent education.
Right.
We may not be able to see every kid every week.
Right.
But if we can bring you in, we can do an evaluation, give you some things to work on. So you're just not out there floundering.
Right.
That's the idea. Even have like a thingy. We're trying to figure some things out because there are a lot of kids out there.
Yeah.
There are a lot of kids out there. The school system's catching some of them. How can they learn, though, if they're not organized? When I say organized, meaning they can't sit, they can't take in information, they can't process information. How can they sit if they're not organized? So the idea we've been kind of toying around is, getting parents in. Let's get you evaluated. Let's give you some things you can work on over the next month or so, and then bring you back in and see what that program is looking like. Because they're not. Parents aren't. It's because there's nowhere for them to navigate to.
Right.
And they feel defeated. They end up feeling defeated at that point. Because it's, where's the help?
Yeah.
Where is the help? And what can I do? And so, that's, again, something that I've been toying with. Okay, if we can just see your child once, evaluate your child, educate you a little bit on what you're looking for. I'm big on parents becoming advocates.
Yes.
Because you will be advocating for a while.
Yes.
And I've been there where the doctor told me something about my child. I'm like, no. Being okay to say, no, that's really not him. But just teaching parents to be educated enough about their child and trusting their maternal and paternal instincts, because sometimes it overrides what we're saying and what we're thinking.
Right.
Enough to say, okay, well, you know what? I saw them once. This is what they told me to look for. And they said call if I had a problem. And so it gives them a little bit of an edge because they feel, okay, well, at least I'm doing something.
Right.
I may not be doing it exactly the way they told me, but they've educated me enough about my child to see that this is not working.
Right.
Or let me try something different, or let me be creative. And so, the system, this is not badging Medicaid or any other system, but they got to come up with more creative ways to make sure that they can fund these kids getting something.
Right.
Because that's another one of the deterrents for the therapist.
It is.
That you're seeing a child for 60 minutes and then you're caught up in paperwork for almost another 60 minutes.
Right.
And so it's almost
that's a really difficult cycle to be in.
It's a very difficult cycle to be in because you're like, I want to help, but I have to live.
Right.
At the same time, right? And so, it would be great if the state, federal government could come up with something to facilitate funding for parents and therapists to make sure that these kids who are on waiting lists can get some type of support without having to go through a lot of red tape to get that once a month. Because it's like you gotta be able to prove that once a month is what all we can do and that's appropriate. And if they don't think that they can approve that, these parents don't always have the funding to pay out of the pocket.
Yeah.
Because they are paying
so
for so many different things.
And they may not be able to work the way that they would otherwise because they're a caregiver.
Or have the transportation to even get there. Right. And so, it does break our heart to some of the parents that come in there and they're just so defeated. They're so beat down and they're just so tired and they've been on this waiting list and they've been on that waiting list. And it can get discouraging. So I hope that someone that works for Medicaid or federal government or state level see this.
Yeah.
And they get their wheels to turning and come up with better tools to help therapists educate parents, to work with their child without always having to rely on weekly therapy.
Yeah. I mean, because even for a plan, I mean, we understand we have to, even when we evaluate, Medicaid gives us X amount of dollars, but you have, and MaRetta and myself, we really try really hard to spend time with our families,
Right.
Now we have to stick to a schedule.
Yep.
But we're also available if parents need to call us. We'll talk to parents on the phone.
Right.
But let's just say basic. So kiddo comes in, they schedule for an hour.
Right.
You evaluate them, you do scoring, then you have to write up the eval. All right. We're at 2 hours now at least, all right? And we think we know what we're doing, right? We're not talking about a new grad.
Right.
So then it has to go out and then it has to come back. But my point is, we're at least at 2 hours.
Right.
Easy.
And is that every session?
That's for evaluation.
That's for
Evaluations and
Okay.
reevaluations. And so there's some agencies where after every authorization period, you have to reevaluate. So that's something else. Like, if you're talking about a standardized test that you administer,
Right.
in our realm, there's something called, if it's a kiddo, it's they get used to, if they have some skills, test smart. You don't administer the same test in a short period of time, not the
Right.
exact same test.
Right.
So, I mean, we'll do questionnaires. You may say, we're going to send you this, and you do a checklist, kind of a questionnaire.
Right.
A lot of kiddos aren't going to progress that fast. Some do. When we
Right.
have parents that follow through,
Right.
we see better. But my point is, that's more paperwork. And I understand wanting to know that what we're doing is valid and,
Right.
and we have some proof, and I get all of that. That's a whole lot of paperwork
Right.
for a little bit of change.
Right.
And which is another reason why there are a lot of people who are no longer taking Medicaid.
Right.
Right, and we're not picking on them by no means, because I mean
Right.
that's most of our population, and so we wouldn't have a life period,
Right.
if we were doing what we're doing. So that's not the point, but it's just an understanding of the why. That's
Right.
why parents can't find therapists, because therapists are like, I'm tired, I'm done, I'm not doing all this work
Right.
for this amount of change. That's the for real.
Sometimes you don't get your change because there's one thing that they look for that you might not have included in your notes.
Oh, and then
So there
it's
is you get that's a denial.
Interesting.
That is a denial. And so like even when a parent sometimes say, well, I'm not coming. Okay. That's like you went to your job and decided you weren't going to do anything that day at your job, but you still expect your job to pay you, right?
Right.
We don't get paid. You don't come, we don't get paid. No, we do not want you to bring your sick child in.
Right.
And
that's our thing. I'm always like, we are not going to skip unless somebody is sick.
Yeah, we
because
don't want you
I
to bring your-
get
You
that.
guys are there. You guys are there.
Let us know in advance so some of these kids on that waiting list
Right.
can be stuck in that
Right.
spot.
Right.
That we can get that one visit in for that child.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that would help.
Right.
That would help get our list down. When we look at it, we're like, hopefully these people had already found someone because
Right.
It's a long list.
it's a long list.
I can imagine. So let's shift and kind of come to a close. I want to talk about what you all are planning. So we've been talking about the family connection and how it's important that everyone is working together to help the children get to where they need to be. So let's talk about what you all are planning, your new venture of parent education and classes and whatnot.
Okay. Well, next weekend will be our first class. It's 2 half days, Friday and Saturday, from 9 to 1. And we're going to be talking about a lot of the things that we talked about today. MaRetta and myself are going to focus on the sensory piece, explaining, when we use that word, explaining the different systems, explaining what you can expect if some of those systems are not processing the information appropriately. Like, what does that look like?
Right.
We're going to have a parent advocate from Douglas County for resources. And then we'll have another. She's also a parent. She's a parent advocate. She's a parent resource person from Douglas County. I'm sorry.
Okay.
And then we'll also have a speech. Yeah, who's also a parent advocate.
A parent facilitator.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And a speech therapist.
But the whole idea is to give parents more information, so you will know how to help yourselves and know how to help your kiddos. And then also you will know how to help us help you.
Correct.
I love that.
And I would love for this to be something that we did on a regular. So not just for parents, but like to go to schools, because MaRetta works in the school system. And so the teachers now are starting to realize the value of having OT there when this little kiddo is falling out on the floor, or they're refusing to do their work, or the head is down and they've been sleeping all day. And the mom's saying, no, she should be fine, or he should be fine.
Right.
I would love to be able to use this format and forum to educate a variety of people. I'm thinking especially school systems. School systems need this.
Right.
You know, so we're hoping that this is the first of many. We don't know, but we have to start somewhere.
Sounds like y'all might have a podcast coming at some point to talk about these things, you know.
And there's some her name is Meg
Farrell.
Meg Farrell. She
Meg
has
Farrell.
She has
Okay.
Now hers is specific to autistics.
Okay.
But I would like, and there are lots of OTs out there doing different things.
Sure.
I just feel like our population is a little bit different. I think partly because of socioeconomic status, and lack of knowledge.
Right.
With that being said, so I kind of feel like we're in a different kind of a space with that, because old school says you give that boy a tail or whipping and he better you get over there and sit down.
That's cultural too.
It's cultural, exactly.
Cultural. And we're seeing a rise in the number of grandparents.
Yes.
That are raising.
Oh,
Yes.
absolutely. And they've done their job.
Yes.
Right.
And so, they have done their job. So they don't have the patience.
Right.
They're patient, but they also are being taken advantage of to some degree, and they're tired, defeated, because this child, some of our neurodivergence and our autistics can, it can be a lot for the parents or the caregiver and especially when they're not able to communicate. It's a guessing game, and so we know that the more educated a parent is, the more comfortable they feel.
Yep.
Right.
And if they are feeling more knowledgeable, then that means they feel more at ease at advocating. And their advocating leads to a better situation for their child.
Right.
So like I
Absolutely.
see it as a stepping stone. We educate you educate yourself,
Yep.
then you educate the community.
Yep.
And when you do all of that, now you set your child up for success.
Right. Yep.
Because
Absolutely.
now you can say, hey, that works, that doesn't work. And so when that teacher calls you and then you're waiting, because a lot of parents are waiting for the teacher to tell them or what's wrong with their child or what happened.
Right.
And that teacher has 20 to 30 kids in that classroom.
Right.
They don't have the time to really put that focus on your child. And there's some great teachers out there that love those students, trust me. But they don't have the time or the ability we have been trained to do, to look at that child and spend 30 minutes, and that's all we're doing is looking at that child to say, I see what happened.
Yeah.
And so then educating the parents about that, so that the parents can go, when they're in middle school, the parents like, hey, what happened in elementary school was he could not sit near the door. Please don't sit him under the vent. Please don't sit him next to a child that chews loudly.
Right.
Please don't sit him somewhere where he can kick against the wall. And this is why. Right.
And that takes a lot of just focus on the child to learn some of those intricacies about them, and then advocate, to your point, because they might think like, oh, that's not a big deal, and it's like, no, actually
it is.
This is an expectation for my child. I know what this child does and does not like, and how they function well in certain environments.
Absolutely.
And I think the other piece to that too is we try to teach our kids how to self-advocate. We want our kids to learn about themselves so they know what they need to quote unquote feel better. Right. In this situation, even if they start to feel antsy, do you have some work I can do? Could I carry some books or if there's a place in the classroom where they can just kind of go and hang out, and some classrooms have these cozy nooks and they have low lights and they have bean bags. Great, because what happens is when kids realize what that does for them, kids don't take advantage of that. Right. They realize it's a calming, organizing, make me feel better kind of a spot. Right. And they know when I'm starting to feel a certain way, when I go in there, it makes me feel better. Then I can come back out and do my work. Right. But I think part of that also is changing the mindset
Right.
All right. That you're just, you're in there playing. No, yeah, I'm chilling. It's no
Right.
different from a parent coming home from work. You've been working all day. And as soon as you hit the door, your husband's wanting to know where dinner is. Your
Right.
kid's pulling on you. Mommy, mommy, mommy. The dog's
Yep.
barking. Okay. And typically what'll happen is, hey guys, wait. Just give me 10 minutes.
Right.
I'm going to go in my room. I'm going to close your door. Just shut out the noise.
Right.
Just give you a minute to just kind of center again. Same difference with our kids. You just teach them. They have to be taught what to do. We're changing that maladaptive behavior for some
Right.
of them, not all.
Right.
But what happens in school is kids will act up, as they say.
Right.
They will. Am I right? Falling out in the classroom, kicking, kick the teacher. He kicked the teacher. He kicked the teacher. Well, what happened before?
Right.
When nobody saw it. Well, maybe he's in overload.
Right.
Right? Maybe he's in overload. Maybe somebody's been coming by brushing him against him. Maybe he's in the back of the class and he has all this in the front, all this movement. Maybe he needs to be at the front of the class.
Right.
So the different things. I think MaRetta's really good at that. Is looking at that situation and kind of figuring out what's the catalyst. Where did this come from?
Right.
The why.
The why is always.
The why.
Yes.
Now, a caveat to what Daniel said, there are some kids that sometimes in the school, they get in their spot and they don't want to ever leave it. It becomes
Right.
theirs.
Right.
That's my area. I don't want anybody else in it.
Right.
And I don't want to ever leave this area. I want to do all my work in this area.
Right.
Because you can't turn the AC off. You can't turn the heat off.
Right.
And so they get stuck in that spot. And so the parents get called several times to come to the school, to get their child. The parents get aggravated and get frustrated. And so that then again goes back to, and I say this, I learn a lot. I steal parents' ideas. I do. You do something creative and you tell me about it.
That's the name of the game.
The next child,
You're right.
parent might be told about that same activity. So
Right.
you guys are part of the team. You guys are the change agent. I say that all the time. You guys are the change agent.
Right.
We just give you guys resources and information, but
Right.
you guys are the change agents.
Yep.
And so just being able to feel that way about yourselves, and know that not in a stress situation, but to know that I have the abilities and I do know my child better than everybody else.
Right.
Because I'm with my child all the time.
Right.
Right. So yes, you can tell me some things about my child and you are absolutely correct, but that's not my child.
Right.
I used to tell my kids, you tell me some things, you tell my kids, you right. I know
Right.
my child did that.
Right.
But the other things you can say, I'm like, no.
Right.
I know that, no, that's probably, something must have happened.
Right.
And so as a parent too, I have to say this on my little soapbox. I need more parents to be honest about their children.
Right.
Be honest about your child. Your child do things that they shouldn't do.
Yep.
And so when a parent comes to the school or the clinic and defend their child when their child was wrong, that's not okay. Because you have taught that child at that moment that no matter what I do, my parent is always going to back me up.
Right.
And so why would they stop that behavior? Why would
Right.
they stop that response? And
Right.
so it ends up being a push and pull situation with teachers, therapists, and the child. And it shouldn't be that way. We should all be working around the same goal. And that is to see that child work to their optimal abilities
Right.
and their functions and to see them successful, because we love it. Teachers love it. We love it when a child is successful. And so that is the one thing I just have to say to parents, because I see it, I'm seeing it more often because more parents are younger.
Right.
So because of that, they're advocating for the wrong things.
Right.
And I want them to be able to advocate for the things that their child takes with them for the rest of their lives to be successful. Not your child takes the rest of their life that I can do what I want to do because my mom or my dad is going to come up here and going to protect me, regardless of whether the teacher is right or wrong.
Right.
And so I am seeing more of that. And it is very frustrating for the teachers. And I completely understand why, because not all teachers, I would say most teachers want the best for their students.
Right.
There's less that doesn't than does.
So parents need to be a little bit more objective
Yes.
with their children. Don't
yeah.
just assume
Just
that
don't
my
assume.
kid is
Yeah.
always right.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
Correct.
I love it.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
This was a great conversation. I didn't know I had a sense of what we would talk about, but I love the way it just kind of unfolded. Anything you want to leave as just your I don't know, your parting words for the audience of just things to keep in mind, or anything you want to put a bow on for today?
I definitely think it's important to connect with your therapist, whoever that is. I don't care what kind of therapy it is. And your job is your kid. So whatever that means as far as following up, it's important, because I always say we can't fix your kid. And it's not that your kid needs to be fixed. We just want to assist you in helping your kid to be as functional and have the best life possible. And so in order for that to happen, we all have to work together. But yes, definitely connect with your therapist. Ask for information. If you don't understand, I don't understand what you're talking about, but give it to me a different way. Or it's so important for you to really get a good hold on what the therapy is about. It's not just I'm taking my kid to therapy. What are you taking your kid to therapy for? Specifically, what can you do to help assist the process? And again, just try really hard to connect with your therapist, because when you have a good relationship, it's a lot easier to move things along. I think that to me is really important. But information. Make it where it's manageable for you. But it's out there, and it can be helpful. But again, the consistency, definitely important.
The only thing I would add to what Dana is saying is, just like they tell you at the airport, put the mask on yourself first.
Yep.
Self-care. Equip yourself with self-love and self-care so that you are your best, so that you can give your child your best.
I agree.
We often put ourselves behind. We won't eat, but our child is fed. And so at some point your body wears out.
It does.
And as your mind wears out first, and your body tags along with it.
Right.
And so if anything I can say to parents is, you guys are loved. Your child's always gonna love you.
Yep.
Love yourself the same. Treat yourself like you're special, because you are, because it is an extra job. It is an extra responsibility when you have a child that you have to give extra love to. And so if you're always pouring out and you're not taking anything in, you won't have anything to give. So I leave with you, equip yourself with love so that you can equip yourself with knowledge. Because when you don't have that self-love, you don't feel worthy of knowledge, and that doesn't benefit you or your child.
Yep. The better you are for you, the better you are for your child. Yep.
I love it. Well, it's Giving Care. That is a wrap for today. Make sure that you subscribe, like, share all the YouTube things, and make sure that you come back for a next episode. So thank you so much for joining, and peace out.